Beacon Press Audio presents Big Girls Don't Cry, a memoir about taking up space by Susan Swan. This audiobook is narrated by Dawn Harvey. Published by Beacon Press Audio, 2025. For my pod, Sam, Peter, Jane, Tom, and my husband, Patrick. I was the tall girl, that whole thing. I just desperately wanted to be like the girls I saw, the peppy cheerleaders. So many of us are living in a world where we feel othered. That's why it's so important for us to put our stories out there. Michelle Obama. Foreword. Susan Swan's memoir, Big Girls Don't Cry, is a book I myself never could have written. Why? Because I'm short. I wasn't short in 1955. When I was 15, 5'4" was the average height for girls then. Those over 5'8" were thought of as gangly and spindly, giants who found it hard to get dates. Boys were shorter at that time, too. Such unlucky girls were told to stand up straight and not hunch, because they were always hugging their school books to their chests and walking in a semi-crouch, trying to seem littler than they were. Why would they have wanted that, I think now, to be short? When Susan Swan told me she had once been attacked by a man intent on nefarious acts, but had picked him up and thrown him against the wall, I thought, wow. Only in my dreams could I ever have done that. Kicking in the nuts, yes, that would have been possible for me, but not wall throwing. I have a fairly tall and muscular cousin who'd once been chased into a field in Italy, along with her friend, by two lust-worn guys. "What did you do?" I said. "We hit them on the heads with our suitcases," she said, laughing, "and they ran away." I wouldn't have been able to get up high enough for a headshot with a suitcase. So, of course, I wanted to read about what it must have been like to be so tall, imposing, statuesque, able to wear wide cinch belts gracefully and sport fashion model clothes, maybe even shoulder pads, without looking like SpongeBob SquarePants. Also, with such a height, I myself could have been more insouciant, not prone to looking over my shoulder, or not as much. Able to saunter less cautiously through life than us shorties. Not having to climb a step stool to get the dishes down off the top shelf. There would have been disadvantages, such as trying to cram oneself into an airplane seat and bumping one's head on the tops of 15th century doorways, but, on the whole, "You should write about that part of your life," I told Susan, "about being so tall." "Who'd want to read about that?" she said. I'd known Susan since, when? The late 70s, when she'd been a hotshot arts reporter and had interviewed me over some book or other that I'd been publishing. She remembers me in a black cape, looking like something out of a Victorian melodrama. I remember her as a blonde bombshell, reminiscent of a prima donna in a Wagnerian opera. We'd struck up an unlikely friendship and kept it up over the ensuing 35 or 40 years, so naturally she was sharing the idea for her latest project with me. By 2018, she'd embarked on an earnest book called Letters to a Young Feminist, a more serious and worthy venture than a reminiscence about her body size, in her view. She was going to explain to the young feminists what the feminist thing had been like back in the 70s, when she'd been a youngish feminist herself, and do some tut-tutting about the reckless and harmful way some of the younger gen had been going about their emotion-driven and fact-averse believe-all-women activism. It is not now and never was true that there aren't any female con artists, fakers, opportunists, liars, narcissists, and psychopaths. There are fewer female serial killers and murderous dictators, however, which is some consolation, I suppose. In this work in progress, of which I was a first draft reader, Susan had included a little but not nearly enough material about her own earlier life, A life that had been unusual, to put it mildly. Not everyone had engaged in performance art pieces by posing as the goddess Diana while standing semi-nude in a public fountain. Tall girls were naturals for such roles. One of the signs of divinity, according to the ancient Greeks, was unusual height. Then there was the duel with fencing foils. Forget the young feminists, I said. Nobody likes unsolicited advice, so they won't thank you for it. Anyway, by the time you get the book finished, your intended audience won't be young anymore, and their views may well have changed, and there will be a whole new generation of young feminists who will find some of the present crop ridiculous. That's how it goes. Instead, why don't you write a memoir about being tall? Gift and curse. The pluses as well as the minuses. I'd read that, but the advice to young feminists, not so much. At first, Susan thought the height book was a goofy idea, but eventually she saw the beauty of it and set to work. The more I thought about it, she told me, the more I realized my size has affected everything in my life. My feelings about being a woman, my relationships, and my writing. In some ways, this memoir is a pilgrim's progress of a woman with a large body making her way in the world. Sounds good to me, I said. What are you going to call it? Many titles were discussed, including Bigger, but this title then appeared as a movie, and anyway, it implied she was bulky. And Higher, my suggestion, which made her sound like a weed addict, as her partner quipped accurately. Susan came up with Too Tall and then Too Big, which seemed a bit negative to me. Too tall or too big for what? And for whom? Too tall and big for the ideas of most people about how much space a female person ought to take up, I suppose. There had been occasions on which Susan had been mistaken for a man in drag. I continued to muse. Too tall or larger than life? Too big or just right? Pilgrim's Progress, trudging through the slough of despond and battling the giant despair. Or Some Like It Hot and Also Tall, a sex and romance romp with love-smitten playboys and freely flowing champagne? Never married men, though, Susan said virtuously. So could Too Big possibly be a lot of fun once a girl gets used to it and defeats the critical voices in her head? I somehow can't help seeing Susan, in some of her phases, as the central figure in the Rockettes' kick line. Gorgeous, glamorous, and the focal point holding it all together. If people are going to stare at you anyway, you might as well put on a good show. After I'd invested much thought and many literary allusions in Too Big, Susan changed her mind again. Big Girls Don't Cry would be her title. Seems that she thought it was a better way to show how people have always matched her size, with the expectation that she'd handle whatever came her way. Either title brings to mind, or to my mind, the scene in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, in which Alice eats too much of the magic mushroom, grows gigantic, and finds herself crammed into a tiny room with her foot up the chimney. The giant's house is an ordinary house, but for the giant, it's a doll's house. It's not that she's too big, but that everything else is too small. However, Alice, like Susan, is smart and trusts her own good sense. Then there's Gulliver's second adventure in Gulliver's Travels, in which the hero finds himself in a land of giants. To the giantesses, he's a plaything. They think he's a cute little fellow and quite funny. What might it be like to look down on men, literally, instead of up to them? No doubt Susan has some insights. And just remember, whatever anyone tells you, size matters. And Big Girls Don't Cry counts the ways. Margaret Atwood, February 15th, 2024. Part 1. I Lived in the Giant's House. 1. It's a hot day in early summer.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?